Hi everyone, welcome to my Shoreline studio. I'm Sybil Muschik. Behind the camera is Joshua Blanc. Well, we're all dreaming about green here, and right now it's dull gray and dull browns, and well, there's some greens, dark greens, and evergreens, but not much of real green. So, to continuing on with our colors that we started with, we're going to be doing green today. So I have a subject would be perfect because it's a spring animal, and we have the Rocky Mountain spotted frog, or Columbia frog it's also known as. And here's a few pictures that Josh took. And he's definitely smiling. Such a cute little guy. And so we decided to we'll just copy it. I've put tracing paper over one that I liked and traced it off. Then I did a watercolor. And I just used a student watercolor pad. It's Fabriano. It's good paper. It has a few little issues, but it's not too bad for out in the field. So it comes in a block. And it's a little more reasonable than the Arches, which is my favorite, but not for, studies. So, okay, so then I did this little painting. And we're going to be showing you this really wet process that is a lot of fun to do and a good learning tool for beginning watercolor painters to try and control wet and what happens to it. And here's our frog. Now the frog was put in as a transfer, as a charcoal transfer. I just left an area with lighter color. You can see the yellowy green on there, and painted wet all around it. And then did the transfer, and then we painted the details of the frog. So it's not a bad little study. Okay, so here is our frog that we started with. And on the computer, I've enhanced it considerably because I wanted to actually do the transfer as a regular transfer, but it's just too light and you need more contrast, and also the quality of the inks now isn't as good as it used to be. You need very special laser printers now, and probably best to take it to a professional house. So I started on the drawing, and we're just going to, there's a drawing on the other side facing, like this one faces this way. So this one is going to be facing the other way, so we'll have sort of bookends. Anyway, I'm going to just rattle through this just so, you don't get bored watching me redraw this thing. It was a tracing after all. And then we'll put some music on, and then we'll just carry on into the watercolor from there. All right. Starting off here, and like I said, we'll just roar through this retracing. Okay, that about does it. And you noticed I started from my left side and went to the right so that I don't get any charcoal on my hand. Okay, so this will be transferred to the gel plate. So this is just an 8x10 gel plate, and it reverses when you put it on the watercolor paper. So rub it down so all of it transfers. Okay, so here is our transfer, and it's perfect. So it's a really good way to get an image if you want to, you know, a detailed drawing on, say, watercolor paper, or even on drawing paper it's just a good plan, and you don't have to erase and fiddle and so forth. It's already done. So we put this aside, and we prepare our watercolor paper. Now, a lot of watercolor paper comes in blocks like this. As I said, this is a Fabriano Studio watercolor. And this is mold made. You can just see the regular pattern on it. And you don't want to be painting on this side. You want to paint on the smooth side. So take it out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet it down on the opposite side, and just take a couple of minutes, not too much water, just to basically glue it to the light table. But it also keeps the top a little bit more hydrated, so that you can work on it a bit longer. Now, watercolors don't really dry that fast, not like acrylic colors. You don't want to saturate it too much. I had problems with the other sheet because it was there. See, now it'll stick nicely. And then we wet this side, because we're going to be doing it wet and wet. And don't over wet. I really got busy with the last one. Pretty well ran it under the tap, actually, and the paper doesn't hold up to that kind of treatment. But you can wet the surface. Now, it doesn't seem to have a lot of starch in it. Like for a lot of watercolor papers, you wet it down and it removes the surface starch so that your color bites better. In this case, it doesn't seem to be quite that. You know, I don't see any starch coming off whatsoever. Now, often we tape the sides and so forth, but this is just a study. We're not going to be, you know, doing anything crazy. But we are going to be talking about a lot of greens. And so greens are, you know, a bit of a problem with so much green around. You know, every plant has, you know, most plants have chlorophyll, and, you know, the variations in green are tremendous. And that's what makes it an interesting color, and also, you know, sometimes a problem. You can have very intense greens, you can have muted ones, and it all depends, you know, what you mix it with. So if you want to have greens that are maybe a little bit more subtle, then mix them with the complements, and you get some nice grade tones, and those things will help you push the greens into the background. And then as you come forward, add more yellow, more brighter colors, and then the greens will, you know, really, I can't hit you in the face. You don't want to go that far. Okay, in this case, I've used a variety of greens, and as I said, with the frog, I just made a greeny yellow, and then it stands out. And then you have some blues in there, And of course, from your, elementary school, you know that yellow and blue make green. So, but which blue and which yellow, that's the question, isn't it? So it's wise to make little color swatches for yourself ahead of time before you start something like this to see which greens, appeal to you the most. And I have phthalo green on my just tiny little, this is a field palette, I guess you'd call it, and it even has a little holding, for plein air work. So, and yesterday I put some water on it. I can spray it again, and that activates your paint. You don't want to be working with dry paint. So, we have wet this, as I've said. So we're just maybe a little tiny bit more. We want this background. And with watercolor, you start from light and go to dark. It's the opposite of oil and acrylic. And use the white of the paper for your lightest tones. Okay, so that should be. So we're just going to start puddling here. And I'm going to start, I think this is Aurelian yellow. And we're just going to just sort of flood the paper with all this color. And as it dries lighter, so that's something to take into consideration. Now we're going to mix some greens. And I have a variety of... Now with watercolor paint, often cobalt is just about the most useful color. It makes the most beautiful shadow tones, things of that nature. And ultramarine, of course. This is a bit of ultramarine, and this one is cobalt. So we're just going to give this a little bit of a background wash. It's where all our little weeds and things live. And you can see the paper starts, you can see the pattern coming out. That's why it's not the best. And this is a lot of fun. These wet things, you can play around with them for quite a long time before you have to make any serious decisions. And I'm just going to change to a different brush here. Okay. Now then, now we're going to make another color. And this is burnt sienna. Which is in the red scale, right? So it's burnt means reddish. So we're adding this is a little bit of phthalo green, very intense color. So we're just going to sort of start making marks. These will be the weeds in the background. And by adding that complement, you get a nice little neutral. So we're just going to, just flick with your wrist. In the meantime, be careful you don't allow this bottom area to get too dry. And just keep it. I had a little bit of green in that brush, and that's fine, where it makes everything cohesive. Okay. So, and we're just going to work. As it dries, you get more and more sharper detail. And that's why this is so much fun. You can just keep playing with it until you start seeing that it's gotten a little bit more visible. More green. And it gives you some nice variations. And having that light really makes the this light yellow that we put in to begin with makes it glow. Okay, we're going to drop in that central light area. We're just going to alter it slightly with our ultramarine, not much. We want the frog to be the highlight of the, so we're just going to put in this light area where the frog is going to be. Sort of estimating how much, and you can paint over that area. Okay, so that's good, and then we're going to drop some blues in, just the cobalt. And we'll make a puddle because I don't want to have it too intense. And then just bring it down. Because it had some yellow in there, it's going to be slightly greenish. And then just mix it in, going in between the weeds here. You do have sort of a horizon line, but you know, some weeds are further back and the water is going in between them. So don't make it just a one line that, and going up and down like this gives the impression of water. Okay. And the frog is partially covered in water, so we'll be putting some shadows and things like that in there. Okay, so a little bit more of a cobalt and a little bit more greenish here in the foreground. And puddles are fine in this case. You can maneuver with it once it starts to dry a bit. So, you know, this is one of those situations where, you know, watercolors take time, they need to dry. We'll probably be letting things dry and then coming back to it. So even though it take us a long time, you will see it in a fairly short time. Right, okay, so let's put in a few more weeds and things. My brushes here, I think a lot of them are Winsor Newton, or this is a Raphael. It's a nice, I think this was a Winsor Newton. It's ancient, it's a size 10. Oh, it's a Grumbacher. Okay, I lied. Right, okay, let's put a little bit more of our ultramarine in the foreground. And I had some cerulean blue, which is a more of an opaque color. So we can bring that in as well. And I'll drop some greens into that. You want everything to look really wet and watery. So you can start on some of the reflections of the reeds. And play with it. You know, you can lift out, for example, like this. And highlights. It's still pretty wet, right? So even if you lift this back and it seems to dry it a bit, it gives you some playtime. Because our reeds are going to be very green, we'll throw a little bit of yellow in the blue. And let that mingle and make, so let it peak here and once in a while. This is kind of an adventurous way of working watercolors. I think it would terrify some watercolor painters because it's really quite spontaneous and maybe not as predictable as if you're working on dry paper. You know, you have a nice little flat wash, that kind of thing. But the rewards are worth it. Give this a shot. And again, we can maybe take out some highlights here and there. This gives it that wet look. You're not going to be producing a turner, but you will. And I kind of think he did a lot of this. I just wonder about the watercolor paper that he used. And he worked really large, so check out William Mallory Turner, great British watercolor painter. Okay, now back to our, this is dried a little bit more. So this is what you do, is you keep working a little bit and then letting it dry some more, and then until you get to the point where you have more of a dry area to work with, and then you can put in some foreground reeds and things here. So I'm using a very limited palette, even though we're getting, you know, a really nice variety of greens here, and very subtle ones, right, as we talk. And just everything back here is keyed a little bit lower. Now we're still wet, but now we can get a little bit more detail. And you know, reeds are, you know, all over the place. They're broken. They have little things at the top of them sometimes. So, you know, flick your brush make it work for you. And having a few pieces of burnt sienna in there, just and the glow, really adds to the composition. So just keep working, bring that forward. Now I don't know if that's Salo Green or Viridian. I have a feeling it's Viridian. Viridian is a little bit more forgiving. Phthalo Green is a very, very intense color. And you don't want them too stark or too in your face because it's a background. And it's the frog that gives, you know, our center of attention here. So they're just bit players. The frog is the main attraction. And he's just a dandy. Or she. Again. And then a little bit more burnt sienna for... And don't forget, this dries even lighter yet. Now you could bring in maybe a bit of red as well, just for interest. So we could try, I think this is alizarin crimson. So be really, you know, don't think too much about where you're putting these reeds. Just be spontaneous. The looser they are, actually the more real they'll look. And some are back here, right? And some are maybe more forward. Some might even have old cattails here on here. Put a few in. It just makes it interesting. And I think we're pretty well done with the background for now. Okay, and then bring those things will be reflected, right? So, and a reflection is usually a tiny bit darker. So a little bit of the blue, more of the green, and a little bit of the red. So I'm going to make sure that's still wet. And then we'll just drop in those colors. All right, so, and if the water is moving a slight bit, you have these lovely little jaggedy looks. You can follow the shape that's up above. That will give it a little bit more realism. But just have fun with these marks. And then start bringing in some little horizontal lines. So a few more horizontal lines here and there. And if there's one that's gotten out of control, you can take it back. But everything's still wet. That's the joy of working wet and wet. The foreground is drying a little bit more. That's okay. We can just run some water over that. Sometimes at the base there's a tiny bit of light showing, so you can bring that in if you want. And let's do some darker grade greens. So I don't know if you're counting all the greens here, but we have quite a number. Now I'm being a little bit more careful because it's drying a little bit more. And then break some of these, you know, they're just floundering around here. And that puts those nicely in the back. Tricky stuff. A lot of watercolor painting is tricky, or it can be. Often you create an impression of things, you actually don't paint it at all, or you paint around it. Paint it negatively. Just a little bit more color. If it's still too wet, you'll just have to wait a bit more. I can hear it's quite puddly. All right, and then here's where we get our reflections. So don't be too precious doing this. Have fun playing with it. You really can't go wrong if you, say you do a mark you don't like. You know, take your paint, your paintbrush, and say you don't like that. Look at, see, it comes right off. And if you want to dry an area, you can use what's called a thirsty brush. And then you can actually dry it. Like here. Having some lights here and there is quite nice. And you can make it darker in the foreground. So another opportunity to make another green. So here's, let's put some of our ultramarine in there. And just a tad of yellow. And some of this cobalt. And that will just darken our foreground here a bit. Around the don't cover everything, just here and there. I think just a few more now of the darkest reeds in the foreground, and then we can let it dry. So, okay, so we've got that nice dark, some of the, I suspect it's Viridian, so we'll call it Viridian. A little bit of the red here. Alizarin crimson. Now, alizarin crimson had a bit of a problem there for a while because it was fugitive, and what that means is that it will fade in direct sunlight, which obviously you don't want. So they had to reformulate alizarin crimson. So it has a different name, like alizarin crimson permanent or something like that. So a little bit more. So see how you work your way forward as the paper dries? And it really gives this lovely transparent look that's typical of watercolor. And also some sharp details. And that's the way we see things. The eye doesn't see all that detail. It focuses on what's closest, and then it obscures what's in the distance. It's called aerial perspective. As we go into the distance, there's more and more air molecules in the way, and they alter what we see, make things a little bit more, or a little bit less distinct. And it changes in color. Usually as you go into the distance, it's more blue or more violet. These clumps are at different heights. Some are back further. That's still really wet there, so I'm going to have to wait on that one. So. Okay, so I think we'll leave this in the foreground here pretty well alone. We might put maybe a few lily pads and things like I did with the first one. We'll see. We need to dry this before I add a few more details. So there might be one more. We won't show that on camera, but there might be one more layer, but we're going to let it dry a little bit more. We'll take an interlude, and then we'll get our real time. We'll probably have to wait about 10 minutes or something like that to let it dry a bit more. And then we'll get our final cattails in there, or brushes. Okay, final cattails or rushes, if you like. So I'm varying the greens quite a bit. You can see, you know, there's all sorts of different shades of green in here. And that's the way with nature, you never see anything the same color. There's always variations of things. It just sort of accumulates over time so that you get that feeling of the denseness of the rushes and still have some transparency in the background. And you can just touch up some of those reflections. And because the paper is still considerably moister than dry paper, you know, this will soften as well. There'll be no harsh edges. And you can put a little bit of shadow, I think, at the bases here and there. And then in that case, you add a little bit of blue. And maybe a touch of the red. So again, that gives depth because you're going up in here. There's the feeling of it going on for a distance. All right. And if you think some of these things are too harsh, again, you can soften them a little bit. Just add a little bit more water. So painting wet and wet, you know, can be quite forgiving. So, and watercolor can be a bit intimidating at times. You know, they say, "Oh no, I've ruined it," because they're, you know, one stroke too many kind of thing. Yeah. Then you have to start all over again. Believe me, I've done lots of that. It's not my favorite medium, actually. I'm leaning more and more towards printmaking as I go on. Love gel plate printing. It's so interesting. Okay, and a few maybe lines across. Now you notice I'm dipping into the dirty water once in a while. That's because I want to keep the cohesive palette here. So it just puts a little bit of tone on my brush. It's not an accident. And there's some really nice accidentals here. Again, if some of these are maybe not as horizontal as you'd like them to be, you can touch them up. Okay, we're good. I think that's about all I want to do with the reed. So now we have to let it totally dry. I think we're going to go on our field trip. Then we will do the transfer of the frog from our little our gel plate here. So we're going to transfer this onto this dry, but we have to put some medium on, matte medium on this. Goes on here, and then we position the frog how we want, and probably like this so that the limbs are underwater. Sort of like that. So, but that has to be perfectly dry, and watercolor takes its time to dry. I don't really believe in drying with hair dryers and things. It just, alters the composition a bit, and I want to be in control, not a hair dryer. All right, we'll see you in a bit. So our painting is dried really well, and we're ready to transfer our drawing. And this was a drawing done with charcoal, or charcoal pencil. Was it Generals? Yes, Generals. Charcoal pencil 2B medium. So we add a bit of matte medium to the frog. Fairly generous. And then I just wipe it away where we don't need it. And just one more little roll to make it consistent. All right, so this is the way you transfer the drawing. Now you place it where you want it. You can see pretty well because it's transparent. And this time the frog is facing the other way. And we're just going to put it so that some part of the body is underwater. And then we flip it over. And we rub the back. And just let it sit for a bit so that the image transfers. Pretty good. Okay. You can see all the details. And I suppose you could do a ghost print onto a plain sheet of paper and do something with the background, because there's still a lot of, the charcoal left here. So, okay, so now we finish this, and back to painting. So now we want to keep the frog fairly light, so I'm going to just paint in these spots with a darker green. So we'll mix up a nice green, something a little different. Then say the background. Maybe add a little bit of our yellow in there. Just a touch of the burnt sienna to bring it down. Remember, that makes colors gray if you use a complement. Just a little bit of the red. I think that should be good. Okay, so now we just paint all the spots pretty well. So again, we'll fly through this. I guess some of the frog is in shadow. And I'll be varying the colors as well anyway. A little bit. Let's give the eye a little bit of that yellow color. Just dropping in some of that blue. Makes the frog eye look a little more dimensional. Now I presume that this thing here is a nostril. So we have to paint that in. That's this little bump here. So we need a deeper color. So we're going to mix our complements together. Our reds. And make it fairly intense. Drop in our green. And now we have a nice dark browny green. And we'll just put in his smile, her smile, whatever. And that. And any lines, important lines that we need. And his little foot is there. And I'll show you a trick. Where you take the edge of where you've done your line, so it's not an outliney thing, and bring it in. Just rub it away almost to the very edge. Depending where you want that contour to be, brush it away from there. For example, we won't do it on this side, we'll do it on this side. And here it goes to this side, which would be the darker, shadowy side. And just gently wipe it back. Then you don't have this line where you don't need it. All right, end up in here as well. And we need a bit of yellow in that one area here. Just dropping it in. And it should go to here as well. A little belly. And we'll leave the top of the frog fairly highlighted. And wherever there's a light area like this top of this lip thing here. So you can put in a few shadows if you want. And then what we're going to do is scrub this area, but I need a flat brush. So we're just going to gently soften. You add water first. You don't want to wreck the paper. Just soften it ever so slightly so that, and now you can drop in other colors. And same up here. We can drop that blue back in. Okay. Same up here. And we can add some of that shadow in here. It's nice and wet, so the shadow is not going to be very dark. You can make it a wee bit bluer. And we'll just take some of those weeds and things a little further. We'll let this dry. We'll do a thirsty brush trick here to make the shadow more discreet. And a few little details. We need quite a bit of dark now. We want to get this color to probably its darkest. Again, very limited palette. We just got 3 or 4 colors on the go. And we're going to drop in our, leaving a little bit of a highlight. And suddenly the frog comes alive. Okay, so just some final little details here. Some darker moments. A little more contouring. And wiping away trick. Gives you that roundness you want. Okay. Clarify a little area here. If you use transparent colors and non-staining ones, we'll go into that sometime, and you will be able to lift off anything that you want. And then just put some of that blue back in there. And just that last little, notice I'm mixing for black rather than putting stark black in there. That's the way to do it. So some burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, and some viridian. Okay. And there's that final touch. Now I could probably go on and on with this for a bit, but I think we have what we need. So there you go, a gazillion greens. Have fun trying this with this transfer process. A gel plate is so handy for lots of things. So as before, take care of your families, be kind to one another. Bye for now.